working to safeguard West Slope water and keep our water on the western slope. Our rivers provide clean drinking water for our families. They create jobs and put food on our tables. That's why the Colorado River District works every day to protect our water and our western slope way of life. Because this is your water. These are your rivers. And this is your Colorado River District.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, and happy first day of autumn. My name is Jim Pokrant. I'm the Community Affairs Director of the Colorado River District, and I'm here to host today's edition of Zooming In on West Slope Water. And this is the second day of a new technique for working with our constituents and interested people about talking about important issues with the Colorado River system and the Colorado River District itself. A lot of folks are probably familiar with our one-day in-person seminar in Grand Junction, usually held about this time of year. Well, guess what? We have a pandemic. So we, as with many others, have switched to a new way to talk to people. And actually, we're finding we're getting more attendance than we do in live events. So as we plan for next year, it's going to be interesting. Do we keep Zooming or do we keep Zooming and still meet with people? I think we're going to do both. So we have a 4-day virtual seminar. Yesterday was West Slope Water 101, and folks can revisit that by going to our website and see that presentation. Today is Waterworks, the Colorado River District in action. And then tomorrow at noon, we have Heating Up to talk about why river flows are down, and that's going to be a discussion with experts about how rising temperatures are robbing the Colorado River system of flows. And on Thursday, we're going to wrap things up with another look of the secondary economic impacts of demand management study that we previewed at our last year's in-person seminar. And of course, that's about the potential of demand management and what happens if the moving of money economically shifts from standard agricultural production to new channels of spending as water becomes perhaps a cash crop. So why do we do annual seminars? The River District is invested in engaging with the public for many years now, even before I arrived in 2005. The whole idea is that if we're going to protect the water security of Western Colorado, we need an engaged public. So I'm hearing an echo in the background. I think we have it fixed. So I gave you an overview of what this week's about, and I think you'll see in the topics, they go to the heart of the River District's mission, which is to lead in the protection, conservation, use, and development of the water resources of the Colorado River Basin. Another way we term that is we are looking after the water security of Western Colorado. And why do we have to look after the water security of Western Colorado? It's because if we don't have it, then we have problems. So think of all the irrigators and municipal water suppliers and households that if you go to the spigot or the irrigation diversion, you don't have water, your water security is gone. So that's our business, to look around the corners and look at threats to water security. 1930s, we were formed because the threats at that time were big Trans Mountain diversions, chiefly the Colorado Big Thompson Project. And that actually engendered the legislation that created us. Now, in the modern days, we're finding another threat to water security, and that's warming temperatures and what that's doing to water supply, and we'll delve more into that tomorrow. You can see on this slide the map. This is Northwest Colorado. We go from the Continental Divide to the east, into the Utah state line to the west, to the Wyoming border to the north, and to the north slope of the San Juans to the south. So when we talk about the Colorado River, we're really talking about the system. So that's the White, the Yampa, the Gunnison, the Uncopadre, the San Juan, the Blue River, the Roaring Fork Rivers. It's all the tributaries that, all the streams that flow into these major rivers that become the main stem of the Colorado River as we get on into Utah. Next slide, please. So what we're going to talk about today is the River District in action. And, that's over the time, that's a hard thing for us to convey, because we are not water providers and sending you a bill every month saying, thank you for being a customer, please pay on time, or we'll cut you off in 3 months. We don't have that luxury of being that intimate with folks, but we're the folks that are working in the background to make sure water providers, ditch companies, and the sort do have a supply of water. So we're trying to illustrate how we work in the background, and we're going to start with talking about Elkhead Reservoir, which is pictured here. Then later we're going to talk about the Lower Gunnison Project, which is a modern day current project that's in action. And then we're going to look to the future and talk about the Windy Gap Bypass Channel, which is on the drawing board, and it's something that the River District and many of its collaborators and associates would also love to see happen. So to help me talk about Elkhead Reservoir today, we have Jojo Law. And Jojo Law serves as the Colorado Water Conservation Board's endangered species specialist and manage the board's participation in interstate and federal endangered species recovery programs. She's the board's representative to the Platte River Implementation Program, the Upper Colorado River Endangered Fish Recovery Program, and the companion San Juan Recovery Program. In this role, Jojo focuses on congressional authorization, funding, water management, and policy. So we're going to talk about Elkhead Reservoir. First, I'm going to give some of the facts about it, and then we're going to get into how it functions. And it's important to note that it's multi-purpose, and endangered species recovery actions are a big part of that. So back to the slideshow, please. And so this is Elkhead Reservoir. So this was smaller in 1974. 1974, this reservoir was built by Colorado, what's now called Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And by 1979, the dam was considered insufficient to pass the maximum flood recovery. So therefore, there was an opportunity in Moffett and Routt counties, where this is located, about 9 miles northeast of Craig, but it's on the county line, to perhaps, if the spillway needed to be upgraded to meet safety regulations, what could we do to increase the water security for Northwest Colorado? At the same time, providing perhaps a mechanism to help recovery of endangered fish in the Yampa River, as well as providing water for irrigation industry, and not to mention recreation, as recreation was one of the main purposes of the reservoir in the first place. So we raised the dam height by 25 feet, and we increased the spillway capacity to 28,000 cubic feet per second. We increased the active water storage from 11,750 acre feet to 25,450 acre feet. Originally, it was 13,700 acre feet. And by the way, an acre foot is 325,851 gallons. And in the process of this enlargement, through a lot of negotiation and planning, 5,000 acre feet of the increase is allocated for the endangered fishes in the Yampa River. And Jojo will talk more about that in a little bit. 6,750,000 acre feet were funded by the River District itself, and through a lot of help from CWCB low interest loan. And 2,000 acre feet of that pool can be also applied to the recovery program. So what we did all this work, and $31 million later, we had a brand spanking new reservoir in 2006, and this picture was taken shortly thereafter. Obviously, that was not a drought summer. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of how the dam's enlarged. It's an earthen dam. And what we did, we came on top of the original dam and built up 25 feet on the downstream side. The concrete you see are outlet works and other infrastructure for the reservoir. Next slide, please. So this is just a look at water ownership in the reservoir. I kind of went over it earlier. And these are commonly called teacup diagrams, and it's an easy way to see who owns what in the reservoir. We won't dwell on this for long, but you could see more specifically, the city of Craig has an interest in the reservoir. The Yampa participants, which is really the Craig Power Plant, Craig Station, has interest in the reservoir. The recovery program has 5,000 acre feet, and there's the 7,000 acre feet that the River District has, although 2,000 acre feet of that could potentially be leased back to the recovery program for, I think the length of that agreement has about 10 more years left or thereabouts. Next slide, please. This is just a visual of the Yampa River to help us think about what this water storage does and how it can augment flows and protect endangered species while also serving the needs of irrigators and others. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to bring JoJo into the conversation, and she can talk about the state's interest in the reservoir and some of the history. And then after we go through that, we'll talk about what's happening currently and how all the planning came to a positive fruition. So go ahead, JoJo.
Thanks, Jim, and thank you so much for having me today. As Jim mentioned, I work for the CWCB as the Endangered Species Policy Specialist, but the Yampa River is close to my heart because I grew up in the area and actually grew up on Elkhead Reservoir recreating, so this one's close to my heart. So thank you for having me this afternoon. Jim, I think, gave a great introduction, and I think that what I can provide today is a little bit of history and background and kind of current conditions of Elkhead Reservoir as it pertains to the recovery program. And as Jim mentioned, he gave a great overview of where the River District came in for the Elkhead enlargement and where we are today. And I think he mentioned back in 2005. And so I wanted to give the perspective from the CWCB and other water users around the state. And so I think most folks on this webinar have at least heard of the Upper Colorado River Recovery Program and have heard of the Yampa Management Plan that was the impetus for the programmatic biological opinion for the recovery program. And how that actually all started was in 2005, the CWCB as well as the water user stakeholders in the basin they took a look at their water portfolios, upcoming future projects, and in 2005, they determined that 50,000 acre feet of water needed to be developed within the next 30 to 50 years in the basin. And that was an imminent water need for both water consumptive supply and for agriculture and municipal in industry as well. But at the same time that we calculated the 50,000 acre foot water gap, we also calculated that because of that 50,000 water gap, 7,000 acre feet of water per year would be needed for the endangered fish, for in-stream flows, for the recovery program as well. So we were kind of setting up back in the day this dynamic of, water supply, consumptive water supply need, as well as in-stream water needs for the endangered fish. And it was almost this, one need versus the other need, and what the River District and the CWCB came together, as well as the stakeholders, is to how can those seemingly two opposing issues come together and really work together. And that's really what the recovery program is about. And so, Jim, I thought I'd maybe give a little bit of background of the Yampa Management Plan, how we got there, and then maybe introduce the fish, if that sounds good to you.
Go for it.
So as I mentioned, I think most folks have heard of the Yampa Management Plan. This is a little bit confusing because the name is not the most ideal, right? There's the Yampa Management Plan that the city of Steamboat Springs developed a couple years ago for temperature. There's the Integrated Water Management Plan. There's the VIPs. There's a lot of planning in the basin, and this plan that I'm referring to is a 2005 Yampa Management Plan that was developed for the recovery program so that the Fish and Wildlife Service could develop a programmatic biological opinion. So back in 2005, the stakeholders wanted a couple of things. One, they wanted security for water in the basin and to be able to develop that 50,000 acre foot of water in the future. But they also wanted certainty for in-stream flows for the basin and the endangered fish. And so stakeholders got together and developed what we call that Yampa Management Plan. And the purpose of that management plan was to determine where would that 7,000 acre feet of water that was needed for the endangered fish, where would that come from, and how would we get that water in the stream? And that's what we really strove to get. And during that process, we examined over 13 alternatives with 8 different reservoir options. Those were anywhere from developing new in-stream flows in the basin, utilizing Steamboat Reservoir, Stagecoach Reservoir, as well as identifying new tributary reservoirs. And Elkhead Reservoir came out at top because not only was it a reliable water source that was already constructed reservoir and just needed to be enlarged, but it also was closest to the critical habitat and was the most cost-effective, and also provided minimal impacts to recreation. So it was really a win-win situation for all beneficial uses on the river. And so that's how we got to that 5,000 acre foot pool with the 1,500 acre foot short-term water supply, as Jim mentioned. And that was specifically designated for release to the endangered fish. Those water rights were conveyed to the CWCB and as a donation to our in-stream flow program, and we allow the administration of that water releases to the Fish and Wildlife Service, since they are the experts on the fish, to be able to provide water downstream. And that's how we got to that reservoir expansion, as Jim mentioned.
Let's meet the fish.
So the real stars of these fish are these 4 handsome fish. I think everyone is familiar with these handsome fish in the basin. But I want to give a little bit of a different perspective on these fish that you may not have been introduced before. So this lovely fish on this slide is the humpback chub. There are only 4 federally listed endangered fish in Colorado. So these fish are a part of our heritage. They've been here longer than I have, than you have. In fact, they can be traced back to about 3 to 5 million years ago, and they're very long-lived fish, so they can withstand Colorado's dry climates, harsh climates. So, for example, this is advantageous because these fish are so long-lived, they can skip a spawning year, unlike other non-native fish, and spawn the next year when it's a little bit wetter. So this handsome fish here is the humpback chub. This is probably our most famous endangered Colorado fish. Most people know it, so it's our charismatic megafauna, if you will. And I like to call this guy our White River kayaker of the river. You can see on its head, that's why it's called a humpback, because it has a hump on its head. And that is thought to, over the 3 to 5 million years, to evolve to be able to navigate the turbulent waters of the Colorado River. And this one is really close to home because this fish was thought to be, we had a stable population in the Yampa Canyon, and now it's actually considered extirpated from the Yampa Canyon because we haven't found it in the past 10 years. And we're actually actively working towards recovering this population in the Yampa Canyon. Our next fish here is the Colorado pike minnow. This is the U.S.'s largest minnow, as you can see here. I call this fish the wolf of the river because it's a ferocious predator. It actually doesn't have teeth because it's a true minnow, but it actually has caudal teeth in the back of its throat. They tell me this fish is either called the white salmon or the filet mignon of the river because they say it's very tasty, but I have not had a try because that would be considered a take by the Endangered Species Act. Again, these fish live for 50 years, and you would never believe that this was, you know, a minnow. As you can see here, it's quite large. And this fish is actually considered extirpated from the lower Colorado River. So we actually stock in the lower river for these fish. This is our lovely bony tail fish. This is what I call the Yeti of the river because it's extremely hard to find and very mysterious. We know the least about these species, and in fact in 1970 there were just about 50 individuals that we knew about. And because we now consider this functionally extirpated from the basin and extinct, we are 100% reliant on hatchery propagation for these wild populations. In fact, when we first started the recovery program and the propagation program, we started with 10 founder individuals. So that's our entire genetic brood stock are those 10 individuals. And so finally, the razorback sucker. This is our famous sucker here. And as you can see, there's a true sucker because they have a downward fleshy mouth. And there's only a few adults in the main stem of Colorado, and they're actually considered extirpated from the Gunnison River. And so between 1984 and 1990, there were only 12 individuals captured in the Colorado River in the Grand Valley. So we're actively working to recover these fish. But the recovery program is successful because we have successfully through the program, the Fish and Wildlife Service has recommended downlisting 2 of the 4 fish. So that's that kayaker fish, the humpback chub, and the razorback sucker, this handsome fish. And that is because of the success of the recovery program. And the status of that is we're hoping that the humpback chub gets officially downlisted from endangered to threatened later this year, early next year, and we're hoping that the razorback sucker follows suit as well.
So Jojo, we need to wrap this up in a few minutes, but let's talk about what's happening in the last few weeks on the river in this, like the 4th driest summer since like 2002. So you are on weekly phone calls that talk, you know, how to put water in the river using resources such as Elkhead Reservoir. So what happened in the last few weeks that we increased releases from Elkhead Reservoir?
Sure, absolutely. So as folks can see from this hydrograph, this is an up-to-date hydrograph that shows the flows in the river. So as you can see, the blue line shows the flows at the Maybell gauge, and the green line underneath that shows that what the flows would be without releases from the recovery programs and from the Elkhead Reservoir fish pools. As you can see, the river would have gone essentially almost dry around the end of August. And that is about when the, right when that flow almost hit 0, that's when the call came on. And this is also reminiscent of 2018. So this is the full releases from 2018. As you can see here, the Fish and Wildlife Service target for endangered fish flows is about 93 CFS. That's the dry year target. And as you can see here, in early September, the flows similarly would have hit 0, but was sustained because of the recovery program. So, you know, coming back up towards that 93 CFS at the beginning of this week, the recovery program is currently releasing 40 CFS, and the call was able to come off the river because of the efforts of 3 entities, including the Colorado River District, the CWCB, the Colorado Water Trust, and Tri-State. And so with that augmented flow, we're getting closer to the flow recommendations and getting closer back up to where the fish can swim around and survive.
Yeah, thank you for reminding us about the entities pulling together to add flows for the irrigators as well to the river. And you know, you mentioned Tri-State, Tri-State Generation, the Craig Station, and of course the Colorado River District. And speaking for the River District, what we are hoping is that some of the things that you just described, Jojo, might be a model for cooperative planning into the future as we experience more drying, and you know, as irrigators suffer, as the environment and the wildlife suffer. Is there a way to operate the river using the facilities at Elkhead Reservoir to ameliorate some of these problems. So that's very nascent. We're hoping this year proves to be a pilot perhaps, and I'm sure we're going to engage in talks and see what a better future can be out there, because it appears that we're in a dry period, a prolonged dry period, and it's a new normal. So, well, thank you for all that, Jojo. And next slide, please. So with that great explanation of the facility from Jojo, now we're going to talk about what's happening in a modern project that's going on as we speak. Elkhead came online in 2006 with benefits today. And Dave Kanzer, our Deputy Chief Engineer, and Dixie Luke are going to talk about the Lower Gunnison project, which is an endeavor of the River District to modernize irrigation and improve environmental and water use standards. And Dave and Dixie will tell us more. First of all, Dave has been at the River District for about 25 years now, Dave? Yeah.
Hard to believe.
Is that a tear in your eyes I saw? And yeah, since 1995, DK has focused on both large and regional long-term Colorado River Basin supply issues, as well as smaller local implementation programs down to the field level to address water supply and demand imbalances exacerbated by growth and climate change. And Dixie, Dixie's a friend and a barnyard relative of sorts, I guess, by marriage and step. But Dixie attended Fort Lewis College and Colorado State University. She earned an MA in English education. Then she taught 7th grade in Glenwood Springs for 30 years while also being a partner in the Jacobs family farm. So I don't know which is harder, middle school or ranching, but maybe you could tell us later, Dixie. In 2001, Dixie and her husband Dion returned to Hotchkiss from Glenwood Springs to raise hay and registered Angus cattle on property acquired by her grandfather in 1918. Dixie volunteers in ag and water groups. She's the president of the Fire Mountain Canal and Reservoir, and she's a board member of the North Fork Water Conservancy District, the Ragged Mountain Water Users Association, and she's also a member of the Gunnison Basin Roundtable, the Delta County Livestock Association, the Black Mesa Cattle Women, and Colorado Cattlemen's Association. So you're into governance and you're into working water in the field. So take it away, Dave.
Well, thanks, Jim, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. I hope you're all enjoying the first days of autumn, as I am. It's one of my favorite times of the year, and of course, all the days in Western Colorado are pretty special. Hopefully, you're in a good place today to listen in our COVID-protected areas. So thank you for joining. You know, while irrigators and ag producers are getting ready to transition their operations from the warm irrigated season to the cold season, moving animals and doing all sorts of stuff, we at the River District have been, well, continue to be busy really year-round with our planning and our funding initiatives that are designed to really help our ag producers, our constituents, and water user community year-round. And so, consistent with today's topic, you know, of water works, I want to talk to you about those significant works that we are undertaking at the Colorado River District and our ongoing partnership efforts like we have with Dixie and others, and the progress we're making at the River District. You know, altogether, these water works that we're doing are really designed to not only address agricultural needs, but to address a whole host of natural resource concerns, while at the same time firming up our agricultural water security that Jim talked about. And that's really important. You know, along with this long list of partners, you know, JoJo and CWCB, Dixie, the Fire Mountain Canal, the North Fork Water Conservancy Districts, we're all working together to reduce water use, reduce naturally occurring contaminants that are running off into the river, improving habitat for native fish, which you just heard about from JoJo, and we're going to talk about that some more. But really importantly to folks like Dixie, enable growers additional flexibility to do other things that are good for the environment and good for their practice and their bottom line, like soil health practices. So overall, you know, our cooperative efforts are resulting in some pretty productive and sustainable agriculture while protecting our recreational and environmental values. So as we move on here from this beautiful picture to the next slide, and the growing season coming to an end, so does our data collection efforts. We are very actively working with local conservation districts and CSU Extension, collecting data, trying to understand how water and our agricultural practices come together. This picture shows some pretty high-tech efforts and research that we've done, side-by-side trials, really helping us understand how to save water while still having a very, or even more productive agricultural practices, increasing crop quality and crop yield. If you go to the next slide, you'll see how our technicians are not only measuring the inflow and outflow and yield, which are obviously very important parameters to understanding agricultural practices. We're trying to understand how our changing climate is impacting water use by directly measuring incoming energy. That helps us understand how much water these plants need and how much we can effectively give them. And these cooperative programs, again, working with folks like Dixie, our technicians, CSU, are critically important to showing how we're going to target our, in the next slide, our cost-effective investments within what we call the Lower Gunnison Project area. The Lower Gunnison Project has these 4 areas, these focus areas, where we are challenged by water availability, as I said, naturally occurring contaminants like salt and selenium, as well as those not only endangered fish, but we have 3 other threatened fish that are subject to some other agreements that we're trying to help recover and thrive at the same time, letting agriculture thrive at the same time. If we look at the next slide, we'll show you some of the practices that we are investing in. This one is sort of the common scene throughout Western Colorado, a very beautiful scene in the Upper Crawford district. But you can see that, you know, the typical practice is flood irrigation. Well, flood irrigation is extremely effective. It doesn't always result in the best investment in time and in water. In other words, it's not that efficient. So moving forward in the next slide, we are at the River District are trying to address this by really bringing state-of-the-art investments to reduce leaky headgates, leaky diversion systems, ditches and laterals, and altogether we call that the off-farm system, taking water from off the farm to the farm. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about this off-farm system and how we can improve system efficiency and how we're doing that. Again, in this picture, you not only see we have, you know, in technology that we're bringing, but we also make it fish friendly. In the right-hand picture, fish can come up and through the structure, and now they can access other parts of the stream. And we are, again, addressing environmental concerns at the same time, providing a reliable water source to our agricultural partners. So as you move on, and I should point out that, and a shout out to Trout Unlimited, our folks that are going to be speaking later today, they were a big partner in that. And we really appreciate being able to work with folks like Trout Unlimited to really help us with our multi-objective projects to make them successful. And to do this, we also are putting in a lot of pipe. You can see here what we call high density polyethylene, HDPE. That is a relatively new product that we're using. If you go to the next slide, that is not replacing all of this blue plastic pipe to PVC pipe, but it's another tool that we're using to reduce seepage and increase efficiency. And so overall, if we go to the next slide, we've been able to install over 5 miles of pipeline through what we call this Lower Gunnison project. This is in Dixie's backyard, the Fire Mountain Canal Improvement Project. A very important project, and just coming to a successful fruition. And this is one of the 4 areas. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that we are doing the same thing throughout, putting in pipe, putting in valves, putting in vaults, doing a lot of work. This is very labor intensive for the ditch companies, for the water conservancy districts, but they yield a lot of high quality, secure water systems along the way. But they're expensive, and we're able to bring money together to do this. And we did this in the next slide in the Bostwick Park area. And we improved this, and you can see that we are now taking what used to be a gravity system, putting it in pipe, pressurizing the pipe so that we can run sprinklers. This and what we call the on-farm system. Dixie's going to talk about that. But in so doing, we are reducing tons of salts and pounds of selenium along the way. Very important for endangered fish and for our friends downstream using this water. Next slide. I would point out also that we are introducing small ponds to really level out and make more efficient our delivery system. This is not too far from Dixie's place to the south, where we have cooperated with the Crawford Clipper Ditch Company to allow them to take the fluctuations out of their system to, again, deliver secure, stable water supplies while not spilling or wasting water along the way. So as we move through the next slide, just some more different projects. We're bringing in technology to help us communicate with these structures and to really be able to even use cell phones to control how water flows when we turn water on and off to users like Dixie. And that's where I want to kind of leave my comments and let Dixie jump in here and talk about the improvements and her role in the Lower Gunnison project. Next slide.
Thank you, Dave. And thanks to all of you out there for joining us for lunch. And also thanks to the River District staff for adapting this annual seminar to our new times. The Fire Mountain Board directors have been attending these annual seminars from the beginning and have been enlightened through the years by water buffaloes from around the world and made new connections with fellow River District folks who are working to protect our precious waters. Today, I'd like to share a little bit about the Fire Mountains project that was part of the Lower Gunnison project, partially funded by money from the Regional Conservation Partnership Practice, which is much more difficult to say than just RCPP. RCPP came to our Lower Gunnison under the leadership of a group of farmers over in the Montrose area, and they branched out to the Gunnison River. This association was formed to increase water efficiency in order to sustain agriculture. The group eventually attracted 30 different local, state, and federal partners, with the Colorado River District becoming the integral leader in that. The Fire Mountain Canal delivers 50,000 acre-feet of water through 34 miles of canal. We have a master plan with goals that include delivery and management efficiency, improved water quality, public safety, and reduction of the number of trips our staff makes to the Paonia Reservoir, about a 25-mile one-way trip, and up and down the canal daily. Farmers have big dreams, but limited budget. So we jumped at the opportunity when the CRPP project was first mentioned in our area. We completed the Fire Mountains proportion of this project this year, $4.6 million. And in April, we completed line piping 22,400 feet of our canal, which included a siphon across LaRue Creek Canyon, which will reduce an estimated 2,365 tons of salinity and between 6 and 24 pounds of selenium per year into this system. It will save upwards of 3,000 acre feet of water loss through seepage. The SCADA that was installed as part of the total project will enable us to have up-to-date, minute-to-minute, real-time knowledge of what water is flowing through our system. That will allow us to respond to storm events in a more faster. And when we do that, we can reduce the amount of water by our cell phones that's being released from the Paonia Reservoir, and control places that we might have spills of water out of the canal if it overflows, or breaks, which can impact the state highways, county roads, and the railroad. Funding sources include the North Fork Water Conservancy District, the Fire Mountain Canal, RCPP, Colorado Water Conservation Board, the Gunnison Roundtable, and the Bureau of Rec's Colorado River Basin Salinity Control Program. Many partners working together, and I think that's one of the futures that we need to work toward is this increased working together for common goal. Part of our long-term plan there has some environmental, has Trout Unlimited's interest. Our diversion of the canal where we come out of the North Fork River into the canal is a place that we have with Trout Unlimited have some plans long-term in our master plan to make some changes at that diversion, which will be good for the river, for the canal, the users, and also for fish there. There have been some challenges, needless to say, as there are in every project. As we worked through this project, we had money from NRCS through the RCPP and Bureau of Rec money. And those two federal pots of money can't be combined. So we had to draw a line along the canal where the RCPP funding and the Bureau funding would meet. And luckily we've had a little bit of luxury in adjusting that, because it's hard to start a project and know exactly how things are going to go and where we're going to make those payments work. Another little challenge we've had that I think is being remedied, when all of the partners, payments came in drafts, and all the partners needed to submit their money, what had been done to a point, and then those were sent in to be paid. And we had an incident where a 3-cent error from one of the participants held up payments for all, but that's least of our concerns. We've also had some local concern about the loss of trees along that were watered along the canal because of the canal seepage. Fire Mountain, as part of the project, we are required to replace habitat loss, and we will be required to maintain that replacement for 50 years. Personally, here on our farm in Hotchkiss, where I live, we have planted trees that are going to be watered or are watered by the drip to be efficient with that, and we've designated that as a wildlife area. None of the things that were challenges, I think, should deter anyone from future participation with this project or with any partnership projects. Personally, my husband and I will be using RCPP funds for an on-farm project west of Hotchkiss this winter. The slide you see here is this farm. It is reasonably productive land, but it has practices that are about as inefficient as you can be in any kind of a project. My family's been involved in water improvements since 1980 on a farm that DK mentioned previously that my grandfather got in 1918 by trading a team of horses. Fruit was king in the North Fork at that time, and he got busy and gathered up the rocks off the land and planted apples, peaches, and cherries. The Jacobs brothers tax return for 1944 shows a $14,000 income from cows and cattle and sheep sales, and $3,000 from cherries and $200 from peaches. My uncles and my father were not very impressed by the fruit crop, and so the trees were eventually replaced by hay. When Dion and I retired from Glenwood Springs, he spent 25 years in the police department over there, and I spent 30 years in the 7th grade. And when they told me I was never going to make it to the 8th grade, I finally just gave up and said it's time to quit. And so we came back to Hotchkiss and got improvements into full swing. If you use your precious water to raise hay, you need a barn, and that was before we got into the water improvements. But in water improvements, we started replacing open ditches, as you see here, that have plastic tarps in them to divert water. We started with replacing those open ditches with underground transmission lines that delivered water to gated pipe. And eventually, 3 years ago, we got around to installing our first center pivot. And we can't see in this picture, but back in the background, where behind Dave's head, there's a bald eagle setting on that, line, on the pivot line. The eagles love that to come out and set on the pivot line. So it not only helps us with our efficiency of water delivery, but it's also proven to be a good place for the eagles. Because we have worked with the River District in the past, getting involved with RCPP was easy. Many years ago, under the River District's cost sharing grant, we built a pond to gather our wastewater and reuse it before the return flow goes back to the Gunnison River.
Dixie?
Yep.
Dixie and Dave, we have 2 more guests.
Okay, I'll hurry, sorry. Okay, long story short, we are going to increase the use of the water and we'll be looking forward to the future. You know, in this land of the free and the home of the brave, every sunset brings a new opportunity, and that's what we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dixie and Dave. And I neglected to mention earlier, I believe that folks who want to pose questions can do so in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So If we can bring up the next slide in that progression, Alicia and Eleanor, we're going to talk about the Windy Gap Channel Bypass. So what is that? It's a project that emerged out of the Windy Gap Firming Project IGA, which is agreement with the River District, Grand County, Northern Water and its municipal subdistrict, and many other stakeholders. And it's a hope that we can reconnect the Colorado River around the Windy Gap Forebay, which you see in that picture. So because we're running short on time, quick introductions. Melly Whiting is the project coordinator, and she's an attorney with Trout Unlimited, doing a lot of work in Grand County. And then we're going to bring on Kevin Locke as well. He's project manager for this project for Northern Water and its municipal subdistrict, as well as other endeavors by Northern. So let's go to the next slide and take it away. Melly.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it, and thanks for inviting us to speak about this project. We're very excited about it, and we're getting closer and closer to the time when the shovel is going to go on the ground, hopefully. So I think I'm going to, again, the project consists of building a channel around Windy Gap Reservoir, and Kevin will get into a little bit more of the details about the specifics of the project. But before we go there, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the partnership, how we got here, which is a little bit of an interesting story because it started as a fight and ended up being a partnership that has proven extremely effective so far. So Windy Gap is a shallow reservoir. It acts as a holding, as a forebay for pumping water upstream to Granby Reservoir. And then the water is channeled from there through the Adams Tunnel to northern Colorado for municipal use. Again, the project, thank you. The project managers there, the suppliers is Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District Municipal Subdistrict. The reservoir was built in the 1980s, and in 2011, Barry Nearing with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, then Division of Wildlife, put together a report that studied the impacts of the reservoir since it was built. There was data before the reservoir, and then he compared it with current data and drew some conclusions. And basically, the reservoir is an on-channel reservoir, so it interferes with fish passage and the transport of sediment. Just go back to the previous, there you go. Just hold there, thanks. So the reservoir interferes with fish passage and the transport of sediment, cobbles, and other materials that are necessary for aquatic habitat. It's pretty shallow, so it heats up the water before it is released. It aggravates stream temperature problems. And Barry Nearing found that when he did the study by 2011, we had lost about 38% of the microinvertebrates, bug species, and entirely we had lost the giant stonefly, which is a very important food source for the trout. Also, the native mottled sculpin was gone, and the trout, this is a gold medal trout fishery down in the Colorado River below the reservoir, but trout numbers, biomass have gone considerably down. So there's some issues there. Just as Barry Nearing was finishing his study, and for a number of years before, the River District, Grand County, Trout Unlimited, and others joined forces to oppose and fight in some ways the Windy Gap Firming Project, Northern Water's Windy Gap Firming Project. And all that was going on at the time this report came out and presented one of the possible solutions to improve conditions in the system. So if more water was to be taken out of the Colorado River, which is what the Firming Project does, you have a system that is maybe a little more resilient and able to sustain the great aquatic resources it has. We reached an agreement, and I'll tell you who the partners are, but what I will call the Windy Gap the Windy Gap Bypass partners reached an agreement literally at the doorsteps of Greene County's courthouse, or Greene County's county building, as the Board of County Commissioners were deciding on the 1041 permit. I mean, literally, that's when the agreement was put together. And what the agreement did, in essence, is make a commitment to come up with the funding and the means necessary to find a solution for this problem. So that happened toward the end of 2012, and we've been working at it since then. Northern brought in $2 million as seed money, $2 million from the CWCB as well. And since then, we've been working very closely together to make this project happen. So I'll let Kevin talk a little bit about the project itself, some of the details, and come back and tell you about the status.
Sure. Thank you, Melly. Thank you all for having us today. This is an exciting project. I'm very happy to be involved with it. It's rare that we get to advance major water projects this day and age, and not only do we get to work on that on the Chimney Hall project, but also make things a little bit better there on the Upper Colorado here with this project. So as Melly mentioned, there's multiple goals here, but it's really what it comes down to is providing an ecological uplift to the river system. The current dam, and there's a question here I see as to why it was originally built. The short answer is to exercise additional water rights on the Upper Colorado River system that were filed on a little bit downstream of the collection system for the CBT to utilize the additional space, if you will, or capacity within the CBT system. So that's the short answer, but there's certainly a lot more history to that, as everyone may know. But this project here will be currently the forebay dam and everything is in good shape. However, we would like to bring in that ecological uplift. So with that, there's 4 major components to this project. One, I apologize here, it looks like the deck got a little bit shifted there with some overlays, but anyway, if we go to the next slide, it may be easiest to see. Yeah, so we can look at this one. So upstream of the confluence here is the Fraser River and the Colorado River. And so this is right downstream of that confluence. And on the Fraser River, there is a existing weir that was built, I believe it may have actually been predating the dam itself that was built in the 80s. But it's a major fish passage structure there that would prevent fish from going upstream on the Fraser. So we're removing that, regrading the river in that section. Then we're creating a new diversion point, which is called out there as right by that modify bank stabilization as needed at the diversion structure. But that was really a note on the note there. But that diversion structure will allow us to have a passive system on the river, which is the connectivity channel, which is being constructed. And that'll allow for low flows and year-round flows to carry down that channel. And then when water rights are in priority, we can send water as needed into the reservoir through that structure. That'll be an overshot gate structure and then designed to allow for overflow. There is an existing spillway called out on here that can handle the large floods that we may see on this system. So we want to still utilize that. So it's a unique embankment that's coming in and diversion point to handle those potential floods. Then the marquee part of the project is the connectivity channel itself. And that'll bring, in total, we're bringing, it's close to, I'm going to get this number wrong, but right around 2 miles of new river that'll be accessible to the public and available for fishing. And then also there for habitat and that sort of thing for all those species. And then we are doing a little bit of work to raise our low block on the forebay or reservoir, as Jim mentioned, to help that out. And we've, as Melly has mentioned, we've partnered with TU, which has been very successful, and then also very closely partnered with Colorado Parks and Wildlife on this. And they are providing significant guidance to us on the river design and just how we go about creating a new river channel that will create as much ecological uplift as possible while providing habitat and other opportunities there for some of those endangered fish, as well as other things there. And then we are currently, if some of you out there have been near there, we have brought this reservoir down this winter, and we did that just recently in coordination with many of the groups here that have been mentioned earlier. We tried to use a little bit of that water that we could to help everybody out. So we're certainly coordinating with as many groups as possible to bring this project as a success.
Thank you, Kevin. So just to wrap it up, I know that we're running short on time, but so the status of the project right now, and if you can move to next slide, please. The status of the project right now, we are undergoing environmental review. The design and engineering is moving forward parallel to that. We have retained a contractor that is providing assistance before construction, and hopefully will be the same contractor that will be building the different components. We're doing geotechnical work in the next couple of weeks, so that's why the reservoir is empty, hopefully. And we will continue to fundraise, and that's a pretty critical aspect. As you can see, we also have RCPP funds through the NRCS. Other sources of funding is Northern, of course, and CWCB, Grand County, the River District, the Upper Colorado River Alliance, which is a group of landowners downstream, and then we have an anonymous donor that has committed $1 million. We still have a need of about $2.5 million to get us there. Right now, the hope is to start construction in late summer, probably early fall of 2021. And then construction would probably go on for a couple of years to wrap it up by the end of 2022, early 2023. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Melly. Yeah, I always mute because my dog's barking or my phone's going off, and then I forget to put it back on. So if we can bring all our speakers back, and we'll start entertaining questions, of which we have a few. So one question asked, would the ballot measure 7A, which the Colorado River District Board has put on the ballot in 15 West Slope counties, help to advance the additional West Slope projects that benefit productive agriculture and irrigation efficiency, like those that Dixie had talked about? And the answer is yes. As well, it would help us if we were to have that ability to improve that $25,000 line item in the price tag for the Windy Gap bypass. So when the board of directors decided to ask voters to raise our mill levy to 0.5 to create about a $4 million fund for we could get in the game of helping these kinds of improvements to the river and to water use move forward. So again, the answer is yes, 7A would help with lots of things. And we have a fiscal implementation plan that people can read if they go to our website. And we called out projects that illustrate how we might help. That doesn't mean that these projects are blessed and automatically to be funded, but they're emblematic of things that we would do. And yes, Windy Gap bypass is one of them that we would be anxious to help, provided everything came together, as well as, yes, many more projects like Dixie's that she's talking about, improvement of irrigation. And certainly the sweet spot for anything the River District would do would be any kind of multi-beneficial project that would help the environment, help irrigation efficiency, help municipal water use, improve recreation and the wildlife. So yeah, and there are projects out there that do hit that sweet spot, and we want to have the means to get in that game. So that's the answer to that question. We also had a question of how the recovery program is funded, JoJo.
Sure, thanks, Jim. The recovery program is funded through a partnership of both federal and non-federal funds. So basically what that means is hydropower revenue, so energy that is charged to customers, that pays for a large portion of the recovery program, and then the states and other non-federal partners also put money into the program. We also receive appropriations from the Bureau of Reclamation for capital projects.
So what do those numbers look like annually in total?
So annually, it's about $6 million with a couple of million for capital projects, just depending on the year.
Thank you. We have a question. I think this is for Dave Kanzer, and it relates to the Lower Gunnison project, I believe. And it asked, how is salt removed from the water system? So when you're dealing with salt in water conveyances, irrigation systems, how is it removed?
Sure. Thanks for the question. It's a good one. Didn't have time to get into it too deep. Suffice it to say that Western Colorado is underlain in large part by very salty and what we call saliniferous soils. Once you add water to those soils, it can dissolve and mobilize and allow those naturally occurring contaminants to enter into the waterways. By reducing what we call deep percolation, where that water is passing by the root zone where it's not being beneficially used, it essentially dissolves and moves that salt and selenium out of the soil profile to the rivers. So we are really not removing it from the system, but keeping it in the soil. We are controlling it, and we're doing this through our partnerships with Bureau of Reclamation and their salinity control program, which is very active, and partners like Dixie, her company, the Fire Mountain Canal Company, as well as Water Conservancy districts, making these investments both in that off-farm system by lining those ditches, keeping that salt and selenium in the soil, or on the farm like Dixie's doing by implementing sprinklers, which again only provide that water which is necessary for the plants to consume for productive agriculture. So hopefully that makes sense. I do want to put a plug in, sorry Jim, to the USGS, which has documented a lot of the effectiveness of these practices through a lot of scientific studies, and through our cooperative efforts, amongst others, we have declining trends that are quantifiable in both salt and selenium in the river system, benefiting millions of people in the Colorado River system.
So interesting fact, Dave, how did the soil get so salty in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a geologist, you'll love this story. Otherwise, you may glaze over, but essentially, where there was an inland sea that transgressed and regressed over Western North America, wasn't North America at the time, but 60 to 120 million years ago, that sea deposited these marine materials, which got consolidated into these shales. And if you've ever heard the term Mancos Shale, it's named after Mancos, Colorado, and that's throughout Western Colorado and Eastern Utah. And that's really the sort of the bad actor, we like to say. But it's also very productive. It's in the Grand Valley, the Uncompahgre Valley, the North Fork Valley, etc. So throughout the West, geologists know that. And even on the east slope, the Pierre Shale is a very similar bad actor in the Arkansas River Basin, if you're over there.
So JoJo, DK is talking about bad actors. And when we talk about endangered fish, there are bad actors, and that's the contest really between certain kinds of game fish and the endangered fish. You want to address that tension?
Sure. You know, and the goal of the recovery program is to recover the fish, and we've got, 2 fish downlisted. So the goal is actually to delist the fish. And I can actually see a world where, you know, that 6-foot Colorado pike minnow, a fisherman catching that 6-foot pike minnow, and that I think would even be a better game fish than northern pike or smallmouth bass. But we are always looking for collaboration on the non-native fish management. Some of the great collaboration that we've seen so far is taking those non-native fish and making a tournament out of it. We hold annual tournaments at Elkhead Reservoir to help anglers catch the non-native fish, but we also have other implementation measures such as replacing smallmouth bass with more compatible species such as largemouth bass. We've been working with water users to not spill reservoirs. Elkhead Reservoir has a really large fish net so that those species don't escape into the rivers. And so hopefully with the spirit and the intent of the recovery program, both worlds can live together where we can, you know, catch our non-native fish in the reservoirs, have the rivers for the native fish, and even maybe one day when these fish become recovered, we can actually make a sport out of humpback chub, Colorado pike minnow. I think that we can all live in harmony one day.
Thank you. And Melly and or Kevin, the Channel Reconnection Project is one facet of enhancements to the Upper Colorado River system that resulting from the Windy Gap Firming Project intergovernmental agreement. So what else has happened that's improved the river? If you could briefly tell us, there's a larger scope of projects.
Yeah, and I can get started on that. There is a number of projects that have come about, not just from the proposed Windy Gap Firming Project, but also from Denver Water's proposed growth and enlargement project. We're trying to work the entire river system within Grand County, starting from the Fraser River and tributaries all the way downstream to Muddy Creek, which is about where Grand County ends. But in terms of northern waters and the lower portion of the whole area, as part of the Windy Gap Firming Project Wildlife Commission Enhancement Plan, there will be about $6 to $7 million available to do channel improvement work below Windy Gap Reservoir. And that just basically consists of recreating the channel, because that channel used to carry a whole lot more water than it carries now. And it's just become, as more water is taken out, it's become really shallow and wide and without a whole lot of good habitat. So that's part of what's going on. We're going to do some of that work. Parks and Wildlife is heading that, and some of the work is going to get done yet in the next couple of years with additional efforts later on. Upstream from there, you have the whole learning by doing effort, and Northern is part of that. So is Denver Water, Parks and Wildlife, and others. And we're just doing individual projects to, again, adjust this river system that has about 65+% of the native flows taken out across the Continental Divide. We're trying to figure out ways to make that system work a little better, a little more efficiently, and preserve those fisheries and aquatic habitat in light of more water being taken out and climate change and everything else.
Thank you, Melly. And we're at the very bloody end, but Kevin, one of the triggers was that your Windy Gap Firming Project actually occurs. Real quickly, where are we with the Windy Gap Firming Project and Chimney Hollow Reservoir?
Yes, that's a great question, Jim. We are continuing to move forward with it. It is currently fully permitted. We are with Windy Gap Firming. We have the federal permits in place to do the work. And we actually have a contractor on board to do that work. It is Barnard Construction. They have extensive experience with this type of construction. So we have that in place, and we are working forward all the time with submittals and things like that to further the project. However, right now there is federal litigation on the process that was, the federal process and review to get our permits. And that is currently sitting in essentially in court all of the briefs have been submitted. It's an interesting format where everything's done through briefs. Even pre-COVID, it was just done through briefs and then submitted into the court. And that's where it sits right now. We have not received any rulings in that on that greater court case, and that's essentially what is where we sit right now currently, and why we haven't proceeded with construction.
Thank you so much. And there we sit at the end of this edition of our Water Week, zooming in on West Slope Water. Please tune in tomorrow, Wednesday at noon, for talk about rising temperatures affecting water supply. And then the more that we know now about the study of secondary impacts, economic impacts of potential demand management on Thursday. So appreciate everybody's help. Everybody have a great rest of the first day of autumn. Looks like we're going to have a little rain up here in Leadville, so that's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
And good day.
Thank you.